Okay, everybody, welcome to SourceMagnetic podcast. The show title is Why Africa Right Now, Later Will Get You Left Behind. So I just wanted to do a quick intro of me, and then I'm going to introduce my partner. I'm Shannon Allen. I've been a serial entrepreneur for over 20 years, and in my networking, I ran into a good man named Tommy Allen. Okay, so he's not a relation to me, but I met him through a good friend, Paul, and we ended up becoming blood brothers. So, Tommy, talk to him. Let him know who you are.
Excellent. Thanks, Shannon, for that intro. Yeah, I mean, we met in, a great way through, a good friend of ours. I always like to say that, Africa has been a part of my life for most of my life. I started going out there when I was very young and, continued probably for the last 45 years. I've spent time on that continent, first with family and then going out, basically traveling. And then obviously through the foreign service and government work, spent a lot of time in a lot of different, embassies, et cetera. So I've a lot of experience on the African continent, 6 African languages, 7 dialects. So for me, that's as much home as the US is. So it's great to be here and great to talk about a subject that that I love very much, Shannon.
Yeah, I know. And then, too, the thing about it is there's people talking about it, but not enough. So we want to be the people to spearhead that, at least on this continent here in the US. And there's nobody better to talk about it than you, Tommy.
No, appreciate that. And, I'm looking forward to, the subsequent podcasts that we're going to create and, talking about a subject that's dear to me, which is Africa, in all aspects of Africa. But, to your point, and I think the title says it all, is that there's so many people that are reluctant, to think about Africa and especially Africa in terms of doing business. It seems like it's so far away, and those are all, compelling reasons, the distance, sort of the pitfalls, if you will. But, you can have the same thing moving from California to Florida. And, as we've talked about before, there's just a lot of great opportunities out there. There's never been a better time. And to your point, I think if you're not thinking about Africa or getting into Africa, then you are going to be left behind, and there's not going to be, room, because first to market out there means everything, just like it does everywhere. And, Africa is such a compelling, place to work. And I'm just excited to talk about it.
Nice, nice. And listen, just for anyone that's not really paying attention, the US government is just now starting to really, really pay attention to Africa in a hardcore way with a lot of investments through the current Biden administration. So let's talk about the surge in overseas investments going over to Africa. Do you think you can touch on that a bit and the different sectors we got going on, especially since, here's a key point. Tommy just got back from Cairo. So he was just boots on the ground. He went to Kenya. Do you think you can talk to the listeners about that?
Absolutely. And one of the interesting things, Egypt is a place that we very much love. I mean, there's a lot going on there, the building of the new city, New Cairo. There's just a lot of interesting things that are taking place there, and they're innovating, they're building. It's something that we've kind of lost sight of. We're not building the tallest buildings anymore. We're not doing those things. So when you look at the African continent, there's a lot of interesting things that are going on there. And one of the real compelling things that we noticed on this last trip was in Kenya specifically was the sort of the green movement. They banned plastic bags. They banned, the plastic, trash bags and shopping bags, et cetera. So this had a dramatic effect from our last trip there, which was just before COVID. So going back and looking at, this lack of plastic lying on the streets and everywhere. So, so they're kind of putting their money where their mouth is. They're looking at real things. Where we're talking about removing gas stoves. We're talking about removing AC units. We're talking about things that are obviously those can have a dramatic effect in terms of, greenhouse gases and, all of these things. But the reality is that you have to start small and you have to make, these fundamental steps, if you will, when you're talking about green energy and the movement itself, to transition from, many of the things that are harmful to our environment. But to see what Kenya has done and to be driving down, in Nairobi or in Karen, or in Mombasa, and you're looking at this lack of plastic and you're seeing grass on the sides of the roads, it was just really very compelling, a compelling story, if you will, on how they've taken just a small step, but it's had a major impact, from our perspective and, through our eyes to see that when it's something that we haven't even done in this country.
Yeah, Tommy, I mean, in Publix, all you can get is plastic bags. They don't even have any brown paper bags anymore. So you're saying that in Kenya, they completely banned plastic bags completely.
Absolutely. And, and it was dramatic. It was really interesting because, some of the areas, obviously, we've had a place in Kenya for many, many years. And moving around Karen, you would get down to, often Gong Road, et cetera, some of these areas where, the culverts, where water, runs off in channels from the rainy season, et cetera. It used to just be deplorable. I mean, how much plastic was stuck in the grates and stuck everywhere. And obviously it causes, massive problems, for infrastructure as well. Well, it was just amazing to be driving through Karen and through these areas. And, I'm not saying it's all gone. There's still trash. But the reality is they made a big step, and they invested in, getting those things off of the streets. And now it's, they're coming up, and it's also created all of these little macro economies, if you will, with respect to how they're sustainable bags and sustainable products that are made out of, sustainable, use items that can be, that can be recycled, et cetera. So it was just really interesting to see those changes between what took place during COVID and then afterwards, and then going back again. So we were really excited to be out there and see these dramatic changes. But again, it just shows what can be done when you take sort of the responsibility and you start to move towards these innovative steps to go green, if you will. The problem here is we're trying to do things in a way that it's not having that dramatic of effect. And quite frankly, it's not the right things to do at the right time. So, they're making dramatic steps where we're talking about things that it's untenable. You can't do it. We can't have 80 million electric vehicles. It doesn't pencil out. There's not enough, raw materials to get to that end game. So there's things that we should be doing that are baby steps to get us to where we need to be. And it's just nice to see that these countries in Africa are taking these steps, and especially a country that's so dear to my heart, Kenya. So it was nice to see that.
Nice, nice. Well, Tommy, do you think you can talk about? I mean, this seems like a big opportunity here for anybody that's listening. For somebody that's looking to diversify and get into the continent, do you think you can talk about the challenges and risks? Because that's one of the main things I know that people are going to be thinking about.
No, absolutely. And as you and I have discussed many, many times, is, we try to highlight the sectors, and you've touched on this, in our conversations just the other day, is that, everyone thinks about raw materials. They think about all whether it's, the wood products in the Congo, the DRC with all of the cobalt and the lithium and all the things that are there, diamonds, et cetera. People lose track of and sight of the other things that are there when you highlight sectors like, technology and agriculture, manufacturing, and those services. And you look at things. In fact, this is one of your conversations that we've talked about before, is, like Rwanda, it's pushing to technology, and Nigeria's, booming entertainment industry, Nollywood, et cetera. But something that you and I have been talking a lot about because of my, love and closeness to South Africa, speak Xhosa and Zulu. And, it's this Amapiano, that movement in South Africa, which is just phenomenal. And I think you can touch on that a little bit and talk about your experiences down in Miami, seeing that. And what is really just phenomenal around those movements is just to see, all of these female DJs and the females that are in this industry, in the music side, which is really a booming business, in South Africa and elsewhere. And not just South Africa, the music scene in Africa, as you and I have talked about for many years, is that it's just such a phenomenal and sort of I don't want to say underserved, but there's not a lot of knowledge about, that sector. Obviously we've had music, Simon and Garfunkel, and, some of the things that took place, and, with the Zulu music, and, much of the music that came out of those areas, Johnny Clegg, Jaluka, Savuka, these early bands that came over and had sort of the Ladysmith Black Mambazo, groups like that. But the music scene in Africa is something that I think if a lot of Americans, especially in the music industry, understood what was going out there, they'd obviously want to be a part of it. But again, people tend to focus on the minerals. You look at companies like Economies and you look at Lonro, and all of those earlier entities that De Beers, all the rest of them, it's all focused on, the mining sector. Whereas the technology sector, because of, such a great workforce, such an educated workforce, and that's something I think people don't focus on as much. It's not just about the natural resources, but there's incredible opportunities in the tourism sector, technology, the entertainment side, et cetera. And so we talked about this the other day. So give me a sense of what you found at the Amapiano sector and this thing that you kind of went to, which I'm not really sure how to articulate that, but you seem to have a really good time and enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah, man. So, for example, like you hit it on the head. They had recently the Afro Nation event here in Miami, and they basically brought over a bunch of like international artists, primarily from Africa, and they had a main stage and they had an Amapiano stage. And for people that don't really realize and to Americanize this, it's kind of like African version of house music, but Tommy hit it on the head. It's a lot of female DJs. It's a vibe, and I think that this music and get new music into the United States, and that's a good way to kind of ease international relations, get people to kind of vibe with each other, get people to understand and move with each other. And entertainment always brings people together, and this is an amazing example. Not only that, you have the actual film industry as well, because Nollywood is huge. And if we can get some people from the United States to see the opportunity to vibe back and forth, it's untapped money, untapped generational wealth. And Africa's blowing up anyway because of the youth economy. And it's a young population and it's on the way up. And in theory, not to over politicize this, but kind of China uses Africa as its China. So if you can figure out how to work with Africa and they're untapped, they're young and educated people that are on their way up, you are going to find your next generational wealth opportunity. That's how I feel about it right now. And that's why I'm glad to work with Tommy on this.
No, that's a great way to put it, Shannon. And you touched on something there that I think, we tend to focus on, at least from, nation state side, as everyone's focused on sort of the relationship, thing with China, with Russia, with et cetera. We know, China's in Africa in a big way. They've been in there for quite a while. And, they've done a lot of great things on that continent. There's positives and negatives to all of that. However, I think you have to step away from sort of the China piece and the Russia piece, or, whatever country, nation state we're talking about, and focus really on what what you brought up earlier, which is the potential, but also the risks. There's risks moving from California to Florida, to create a new business opportunity, et cetera. That comes with, lots of difficulties and logistical difficulties and risks, et cetera. And in trying to, move a culture, which is California, and trying to create a new entity in Florida, which has a different culture. So, same thing could be said about Africa. Because of the distance involved, the planning has to be more careful. It has to be, you have to look at, there are some logistical challenges. Flying has never been easy to get that. It's not a place that, is 2 hours away. It's, 15, 14, 16, 17, hours away. And depending on how you fly and how you get there, there's a lot of challenges with that. You also have to put the infrastructure on the ground, which is set up companies, et cetera, because it just doesn't work. As we've talked about, we've had a company in Kenya since 2015 and relationships out there in some of these countries for, going 35 years. So we have a lot of experience on that continent, and we've done the right things, I think, in the right way to set ourselves up to create what you've, termed generational wealth. And I think that's the answer for anyone. It's not an easy place, to get into. And when I say place, we're talking about a variety of countries that, everyone seems to, think Africa is one country. It's not, as we've talked about many, many times. And, there's a new book that was put out, about that very thing, in terms of, Africa is not one country. And I think that's part of the problem, is that everybody sort of generalizes when they're talking about Africa in general. But there are lots of risks. There's lots of technical difficulties and, getting set up there, but that shouldn't deter anyone. As easy it is to move, your company from California to Florida, the same could be said to get into, to Africa. There are a lot of incentives. There are a lot of things, that are being offered right now to companies to go into various African countries. And if we specifically, focus on East Africa, there's a lot of things there. You've got, Ethiopia, Somalia is a different story. There's a lot of challenges there, but, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi. I mean, you've got amazing opportunities there. Again, in the manufacturing side, technology, transport, power sector, critical infrastructure, telecommunications. And again, the challenges are that you have to go in there with your eyes wide open. You have to find the right partners on the ground, which isn't that difficult. Difficult if you spend the time and the energy to, to get to know the people and get to, know and understand what products and, and services you're trying to sell, or what it is you're actually trying to do from an infrastructure perspective. So again, and then the challenges, risks, obviously, like any place. I mean, whether we talk about the United States or Europe or Africa, that corruption word always kind of comes to the top. But the reality is, there's corruption everywhere, and there's logistical difficulties. There's all those things that we've talked about. But having said that, those are all managed in the way you set up the infrastructure and the way you set up your company. And obviously, if you go in, with the idea in mind that this is not going to be a 2-year, 1-year project, turn around and boom, take my money and leave. These are long-term opportunities. And I think you have to go into Africa with the idea in mind that you're going to be there for a while. You're going to build up infrastructure. And I think it can be a win-win for your partners on the ground, as well as your investors, et cetera. So a lot of opportunities, and hopefully we can talk more specifically and get down into the macro areas, when we talk about, the various African countries out there where we see our opportunities, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. And to your point, I was thinking about the fact that I've traveled overseas. I haven't been to Africa yet, but I've been to the UAE, I've been to Singapore. Both of those places basically sprung out of nowhere, and people don't realize that, but they're beautiful. They got the tallest infrastructure in the world right now. Singapore has the cleanest place in the world to me. I know that many countries within Africa are on their way there. Do you think you can do that comparison? Because I know you travel to those places as well. Do you think you can do a cross comparison?
Oh, absolutely. When you think about, there are a lot of challenges with, UAE, with, whether it's, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, whether it's, Qatar, et cetera. There's a lot of challenges, I think, that, it's sort of the unsaid things. There's, cultural differences, et cetera. Now, those are not, the preeminent markers. But having said that, when you look at places like, Kenya, you look at places like South Africa, there is amazing infrastructure there. And there's all of the things that we talk about, whether it's agriculture and food, processing, renewable energies, technology and telecommunications, infrastructure development, all of those things that we've seen because of the sovereign, wealth funds that Abu Dhabi has, that Saudi has, et cetera. They've managed their resources, I think, in one sense, better than Africa, in that people have benefited better, because of the sovereign wealth funds that have been created. The average person in the UAE and in Saudi, benefits far more than, say, the average person in Namibia or South Africa or the Congo. Part of that is been because this lack of sort of good governance and democratization in those areas, where it's created the opportunities for the government to actually share that wealth. When you look at some of these countries like South Africa, Namibia, DRC, et cetera, their resources are enormous and immense. And the idea that many people, in those countries are not benefiting from that wealth, well, that goes back to the C word, the corruption word, and you need to talk about these things, because people need to benefit from the largesse, if you will, of the governments. And there's a lot that can be done there to spread that wealth and share that wealth. in ways that I think could be very creative, and it would obviously create a boom there. Africa just has such immense opportunities, whether it be the people, whether it be the resources, et cetera. So, comparing, UAE or, Abu Dhabi or, Saudi, Qatar, et cetera, Bahrain, Oman, to many of the African countries, there's a little bit of a difference, I think, in that, so much of Africa is still untapped. There's a lot of opportunities there that, the individuals that get first to market, well, you have a lot of opportunities there. Well, a lot of the young Africans are seeing this. They're coming over to the States. They still go to Europe for education, but they're going back now. They want to be back in their countries because they see these immense opportunities that can be had on the ground there. And so what they're doing is bringing in partners from the States, et cetera. And that's why I say that, and you touched on this, is that, American businessmen, to get them to go to Africa, it's like still this, I hate to use that word, but it's still like the dark continent. People have no concept in many ways of what Cape Town is, of what, Nigeria is, what Lagos, Abuja, these areas that have incredible cities and incredible, diversity and incredible opportunities that are taking place. And I think it behooves us, obviously, because we work out there, but it behooves us to, to spread the word. And that's why I'm excited about these podcasts. And obviously, we'll hone these things in as we go along and start to get into very specifics. But, this first one is really, to touch on, just what's out there and try to get the excitement going. Because, when I talk about Africa, if you can't hear the excitement of my voice, then obviously you're not listening, because Africa is a place that, in the various countries, whether it's North Africa, East Africa, West Africa, South Africa, Central, there's just so many opportunities. And I think there's something there for everyone that you can find your golden ring, if you will, if you just look and you spend the time and take the time to look through these areas and get in touch with the people and find the right opportunities.
Find your tribe, man. So wait, to that point, Africa is the home of various tribes, and each has its own culture, language, and traditions. You said 7 different African languages, man. Do I have to be able to speak all these languages to get into these different countries? What's the deal with that? Or does that just help you just communicate better?
No, obviously, when I was young, Shannon, I had the opportunity. I ran into, the great explorer Wilfred Thesiger, and, obviously met Peter Baird, the photographer in Kenya, and just, amazing men. And, they were very different but similar in their own ways, in that they loved Africa. They loved Africa for what it was. In Peter Baird's case, it was, obviously the artistic side, the art, the photographs, everything about Africa he loved, and Wilfred Thesiger was probably one of the last great explorers of the 20th century. And when I met him, the first thing that he said to me is, he said, if you want to really understand, the people that you're dealing with, you need to learn the languages and understand their culture. And so I took that to heart, and I always joke about it. Growing up in California, most of my friends were Hispanic, and my Spanish is deplorable. I can barely speak Spanish, maybe 10 words, you know what I mean? But I took it to heart so greatly that I learned, 6 African languages, spent a lot of time with the US government, out there, and had the opportunity to be in places to where the language and the culture, and many times I was the only Mzungu, the only white guy in areas, for, 1,000 square miles. And so it really taught me to, that just how important the language was. But to your point, do you need to speak the language? Absolutely not. I mean, Africa, in many cases, dealing with, somebody like in a tourism, setting where their drivers or their guides, et cetera, they speak 4 languages, including several European, languages, not to mention English. And it's incredible when I hear people talk about Africa, or I talk about, Central South America, where the average person is usually speaking, their father's language, mother's language, and then perhaps, 2 or 3 other languages. So the diversity of linguistic capabilities out there is immense. But do you need to speak them? No. Does it help? And it always helps, as to try to learn a few words. It just makes people happy. When you try to learn someone's language or culture, it really it makes a difference. And so for me, that was always a big part of it. The culture and the language was, part and parcel to the whole, experience for me of learning, about the various African countries and the dialects, the languages, the tribal groups, the clans, etc. And that's, for me was always a big part of being out there. But it's not necessary. I mean, English is so widely spoken. Then you move to other areas where French becomes, the dominant language, Portuguese, etc. So, it helps to have, additional languages. But having said that, it's not important. You know what I mean? What's important is to, to accept, the areas where you are and the people, and to go in with your eyes wide open, and to, to see it through their eyes, the experiences there, because that's where you really begin to, understand the opportunities out there and what can be done, and the opportunities that can be had, through meeting the people and really getting to know them.
Well, okay, that is amazing. Now I feel a little bit better about going over there. What about like I'm used to downtown Miami. Talk to me about the urbanization in the modern cities out there. Like, because there's a lot of misconceptions about the different cities out there. What's your experience with the major cities, just as far as comparative thought process? Because I just started looking to Cape Town, and it's beautiful. I mean, and the cost as far as what you can get for the dollar. I've been telling everybody about the fact that I'm looking at this, and hopefully, we don't drive up the prices of real estate. But it looks like if you were to get like a $60 million home in Malibu, and that same thing out there is $3 million. I mean, Tommy, talk to him about that.
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to my comment. It's about this, and we'll bring up this. I can see the title in my mind of, that Africa is not one country, but there's this misconception about what Africa is, and what these countries look like. It would blow your mind to go through just the diversity of building, of infrastructure, of housing, et cetera, between, say, Cape Town and Durban, and Windhoek in Namibia, and Nigeria and Kenya and North Africa, Tunisia, Algeria, whatever it is there's this idea that everybody lives in grass huts out there. The reality is far from different, and this as a fact. I mean, there are incredible, houses out there. There are, African billionaires. There are, billion-dollar companies that are out there. Multiple, many companies out there that are billion-dollar companies. So, so the potential and the opportunities in the real estate fields, et cetera, is just unbelievable. And you've seen this for yourself, as you talked about South Africa. You've seen some of these amazing places that here would cost you 30 million, 20 million. You go over there, they're 2, 3, 4, $5 million. And I'm talking about, these are phenomenal, housing, opportunities. And it's just people, they don't understand that. They don't understand what's out there. And especially in the, when you talk about potential for, returns, et cetera, there's, instant gratification, as we've talked about, that's not feasible. That's not what you want out there. But the potential for significant and sustained returns over time is considerable, due to factors like we've talked about before, the demographic trends, all these other things. But having said that, the economic, opportunity with urbanization, with the building trends that are out there, it's just unbelievable. And I think if someone could go between, Cape Town and South Africa, and go to Karen in Kenya, and go to other areas, they'd see immediately, my God, it's like going from, Bel Air to, Malibu to San Diego, et cetera. It's just the infrastructure out there it's a thriving, real estate market. It's a thriving, logistics market. It's a thriving, development market out there, especially in terms of construction, et cetera.
What about the technology? How fast is the internet out there?
Oh, it always cracks me up when I hear people talk about, we have no problems. We work out of Kenya, a lot. We have high speed internet. We, and there, they've created, some of the most incredible, systems out there. M-Pesa, their financial system, it's been around for a long time, long before we started doing, pay modules and banking, over our cell phones, et cetera. It was out there. Ushahidi, which was a crowdsourcing platform that was developed in Kenya. So there's, the technology sector out there is amazing. And you have a very young, workforce out there that's very educated. When we talk about IoT devices and talk about, all the things that are important to us, the Web 4 development, all these things, these are things, whether it's, cryptocurrencies, whether it's, technology aspects of the economy, it's thriving. And you've got this amazing young workforce that's eager. And so opportunities in the technology sector is, they're immense. Absolutely.
Nice. All right. So we've been going for a good amount of time, and we just want to get people's appetite wet to experience this. And we're going to keep this podcast thought process going. We're going to wrap this up and talk about some final thoughts here, because I want to go over there, and I'm going to talk Tommy into accompanying me so I can make sure that I got all of my linguistic elements handled. Talk to us about the difference between the cost of living, what you can have from a comparative perspective of somebody that's not left the North American continent. What can you get as far as living is concerned, like as far as going to the grocery store, what you can get and how far your dollar can go just to live, use the internet. If somebody's trying to start a business, what are the costs in comparison? Just so somebody that's listening to this podcast, they can get just as excited about Africa as we are. What are your thoughts?
Well, again, one of the biggest hurdles, obviously, is that it's making that first trip out there, and this is where you've got your flight costs, you have your hotel accommodations, all those things. Because it's no different than, say, if you and I were going to just basically from Denver, Colorado to Miami. Is that we have to basically think about the same things. But the cost of living overall in many of these countries, you can find very creative ways to where your dollar goes a long way. But again, I think you can probably talk about this better than I can in terms of, because you understand the Miami market, but the average price per square foot for a condo in Miami was what, around $500, for what, for $1 million you could expect to buy what, a condo of approximately 2,000 square feet, something
Yep.
like that. So obviously your money goes a long ways in Africa. And I think for that same thing you can probably build twice as much, and in environments and areas that are absolutely phenomenal. And so one of the interesting things is that, as I said before, your cost of travel, that's where it kind of hits, is when you go out there, you have to have a plan in mind that you're going out there, because obviously staying in hotels for 30 days, 60 days, etc., that obviously runs into a significant cost. So you have to have the idea in mind that you're going out there, set up a business, whether it's you're leasing a condo, or whether you're leasing a house or buying a house, etc. The bang for the buck, if you will, it goes a lot further in many of these areas than you would think.
Well, yeah, to your point, I've been doing some hardcore research. For anybody that's listening to this, go to Airbnb and type in Cape Town. And the Airbnbs are phenomenal. I showed some friends and they were wondering if the dollar's cost was real. So you can get an oceanfront apartment or condo for $30 a day. That's out of this world. If you look at this, I mean, people wouldn't even believe it. I mean, and Tommy, I think you said you're from California. Compare the views in Cape Town to Malibu. Isn't it pretty much equal?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's spectacular. I mean, the coast, the Southern Cape, and it's not just South Africa. It's, no matter whether it's Kilimanjaro and, in Mozambique, Mozambique, Tanzania, and we talk a lot about this. When you think about 2,000 plus, 3,000, 4,000, kilometers of coastline, when you think about Somalia in this untouched area, and obviously there's challenges there. Those challenges are not going to go away tomorrow. But when you start thinking about the long-term opportunities across many of these countries, it's just absolutely spectacular. And to look out over the Indian Ocean, whether you're in Watamu in Kenya, whether you're in Dar es Salaam, whether you're in Lamu, Malindi, it's spectacular. The coastlines they don't have all the development. It's not like going to Myrtle Beach or, in South Carolina or North Carolina or Cape Hatteras, or, where it's just building after building after building. There are still, large stretches of areas that are just absolutely, untouched and pristine. And a lot of that is because some of these areas have, buffer zones where there's reserves in place, et cetera. So they're doing all the right things. And I think, from a potential for luxury living and comparable instances, if you will, with Miami or Monaco or California, et cetera, I think you can find the same opportunities and the same lifestyle in Africa that would, blow most people's minds, if you will.
Yeah, man. So, hey, this has been amazing. I want to thank you for your time, Tommy, and I appreciate you for jumping on this podcast concept. We're going to keep people coming back for more information on our global business that we're working on. We are partners on a company called SourceMagnetic, and SourceMagnetic is a sustainable environmental advocate for marine advocacy, sustainable food production, and looking at amazing opportunities internationally, specifically focusing on Africa as a primary place, but we're open to doing business in other places. So, Tommy, do you think you can give them some parting words?
Oh, absolutely. And again, I think we were, as I was probably a little bit scattered because I just get so excited when we're talking about Africa. But, to your point, the subsequent podcasts that we have, we're going to try to really hone in and talk about specifics. And, to Shannon's point, we're partners in a number of companies, and we're trying to create, a sustainable environments in all the, the areas that we're working. And we have some really interesting things that are coming along and down the pipeline, opportunities, as well as some of our, projects that we're currently involved in that we'll slowly get into as we start to, move through these podcasts. But it's been a pleasure. And it's, again, speaking about Africa, I could do that all day long. And we're hoping that we get some people excited out there. And obviously we're here to, answer any questions. And again, Shannon, thanks for putting this together and for the invite, and look forward to many more of these podcasts.
Yeah, definitely. And then everybody, if you get to this end of this show, definitely go to sourcemagnetic.com and go to the contact page. If you're thinking about doing some business in Africa, or if you want to give us some feedback on the podcast, or if you got some tips for us. So we appreciate you guys. Definitely stay tuned. And if you got any ideas for future podcasts, definitely put it in the comments below. But the best thing you can do is go to sourcemagnetic.com, fill out the form, and let's figure out a way to build.
Excellent. And so parting words, Asante Sana Kwaheri, huh?
What did you say, Tommy? Break it down for me.
I just said thank you and goodbye in Swahili. So, we'll get some other people on here, some of our colleagues in Africa that can get on and chat with us. And even hopefully we can get some of those young ladies from South Africa and get them on here as well. But we're going to have some fun, and I'm really excited about this, Shannon.
Definitely, definitely. All right, guys. Take it easy, everyone. God bless. Good night.